Hi everyone, my name is Tiffany Zhang and I'm the founder and host of Empathy Gaps, an online YouTube video podcast. Ever since I was into psychology, I always looked up to the American Psychological Association for the latest research and news. In this episode, Dr. Wendi Williams and I will discuss cultural psychology, AI in mental health care, and the necessary changes needed to alleviate the mental health crisis. Here is my conversation with him. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Empathy Gaps, an online video podcast focused on creating a safe space to discuss mental health and psychology. I'm Tiffany Zhang, your host, and today we have a very special guest, Dr. Wendi Williams. Dr. Williams is the elected president of the American Psychological Association and the author of several books about Black women's leadership. Dr. Williams, thank you so much for being here today and taking the time to join me. Before we start, is there anything that you want to add regarding to what you do or who you are?
No, let's just get into it.
Of course. So, as I mentioned in my introduction, you are the elected president of the APA. So, as a
Mhm.
president, what is your, I guess, vision for psychology and the APA?
Absolutely. So I'm the president-elect. I was elected last year, for the president-elect this year, and I'll be president in 2026. My vision for APA and the platform that I ran on was on Radically Well Together. And so that platform really centers my vision around wellness as a right and um, a right and a privilege that we all deserve to have and that we don't share equally. And so I'm wanting to sort of highlight and amplify the ways in which that occurs in our world, but also what we can do as psychologists to combat disparity and inequity that creates differential experiences of wellness and of health. So we see that those differences fall in lines of racial and cultural diversity, socioeconomic status, and ability status, and the like. And so just thinking about the ways in which psychologists can be active in creating wellness more broadly for as many people as possible and using this platform to do so.
Yeah, thank you so much for your response. I'm really glad to hear your vision for the APA next year. And I also
Mhm.
wanted to touch back on something else that I said in my introduction.
Mhm.
You have authored several books about Black
Mhm.
women's leadership. So can you, I guess, elaborate on like your work that you've done in that field and also elaborate
Mhm.
on the BWLL?
Yeah, so BWLL, I sort of say in my head, I call it Be Well. So there's that. But looking at Black women's liberatory leadership praxis, and really that's coming from the lessons that we can learn from leaders who have come before us and some of the leadership praxis that have made it possible for them to lead in difficult contexts and situations. But to be quite honest, Tiffany, I find that some of the current cultural and political climate to be very reminiscent of what our um, elders and ancestors have faced in other times. And so they're very instructive, I think, for how we might move forward or what strategies we might put into place. So be well is this praxis, is this way of thinking about that, not only from the perspective of what has happened historically, but also then what are some of the tactics and ways that I've witnessed because of my work with Black women and girls in leadership development that are still enacted and are also in play as folks navigate the current social cultural context. And so that has, for the most part, shaped some of my work in writing. So I've focused on Black women's leadership and also experiences in the workplace because they tend to be contested areas and sometimes difficult just because of this country's history with Black women in the context of labor. And talking explicitly about the foundations of the country and the enslavement of African descent people. And so the overlay or the trajectory of how that the arc of that I should say over time, and so the ways in which we see that happening in contemporary spaces, and so how that then shapes the work experiences of Black women today. I'll also say though too that what has been really really important for me is that Black women's experiences are not exclusive to us. They merely show, I think, a foundational and rationale for what we see happening to many folks. So when we're looking at labor justice movements, when we're looking at some of the experiences that are happening for minoritized folks within our society and our culture, when we think about the impact of socioeconomic disparity and the impacts on folks' lives, whether in the context of their labor and their personhood, their health and their wellness, these things begin to interplay. But I do think about and talk a lot about the foundations in this country of not only Black women, but Indigenous folks as well, and how those experiences really do shape some of what we continue to see in terms of inequity in the society.
Yeah, of course. And can you also, I guess, like you talked a little bit about like healthcare equity and stuff. Like,
Mhm.
can you also elaborate a little bit on your work in that field as well?
Well, just thinking about, it's not, uh, you know, in the space of the medical field, but what we know, as what I know as a psychologist, we know in the field of psychology is that physical health and wellness is very much interrelated with mental health and wellness. And, so we know, for example, if someone has chronic illness and disease and they're in chronic pain, that oftentimes anxiety and depression are associated with that because of one's relationship to how they're experiencing the symptomology in their body. So if I'm experiencing chronic pain and I'm very worried often about how, if I'll have the energy or the ability to get up and do things later in the day, then I may have some depression if I'm not able to do so, if I'm not able to participate in a family event or something that feels important to me because of the pain, or I might feel anxious, that this event is coming and I'm not sure if my medication is going to work well for me and if I'm going to be able to enjoy myself as much, or if, so those are that's like one example. So when we think about disparity in health and wellness, just to appreciate that when you have differential experiences of access to, access to healthcare, access to mental health care, access to, in our country, in the US, your access to healthcare is mediated by access to insurance, and medical insurance and health insurance. And so that we do see disparities in those numbers as well. And so those factors societally and within the environment shape then one's experience of whether or not they feel healthy and well, or that they have the opportunity to access the resources to feel healthy and well. And so my work, and thinking about those disparities as they impact the lives of women and girls, Black women and girls specifically, but others generally, that's where it's played out.
Yeah, thank you so much for your remarks. I guess it was really insightful to hear. And I
Hmm.
guess like continuing on the theme of like healthcare disparities and like
Hmm.
cultural competence, like
Hmm.
what role does cultural competence play in like addressing the mental health crisis? And like how can healthcare providers be more culturally competent?
Yeah, I think primarily it really boils down to respect. We sometimes have these, big concepts and words that sort of describe, what we're getting at. And when you're being multiculturally competent or having awareness of the multiple perspectives and cultural experiences of people, it's to understand and respect um, that is just coming from, appreciating that their way of thinking about their world, their way of engaging the world um, is very much, I would say, shaped by their cultural experiences and how they understand their world and their in that experience. So, when we're thinking about cultural competence, it's about whether or not one, as a provider, whether as a psychologist, as a mental health provider, as a medical provider, as an attorney, as a anyone providing any service to anyone, that I think about who you are and what you bring to the table and what you may need to feel more comfortable, what you may need to have a sense of access, or a sense of being being seen, heard, and understood within that space.
Yeah, of course. And I think that's so great that you brought that up. And I also wanted to ask you a little bit about like technology's role in cultural competence. So I know there's been a lot of new technology specifically in the mental health care field, such as AI. So how do you foresee like AI's role in mental health care or just like cultural competence and mental health care in general?
Mm. Well, what we know about artificial intelligence, whether it's emergent or just the use of the large language models, is that it's very much dependent on the cultural foundations of those who've created that work. And so Silicon Valley has not been noted for being very socially diverse or culturally diverse or even gender diverse. There's ways in which we try and we want to push to see more of that, but we also have seen a very huge backlash. So I think that that's really important to sort of set in the context of this. And so with regard to those large language models and the ways in which the technologies have been developed, we also then are mindful and have to be mindful of the cultural assumptions embedded in some of the programmers and the ways in which folks have developed that work. Um, so when I think about AI relative to psychology, we do know that there have been some AI bots and chat bots that have been used to do some psychological work. But one of the main premises of the AI is to have this agreeableness with the folks who are participating, the participants with it, and so interacting with it. And so, from the perspective of psychology, a psychologist's job and role is not to be agreeable, it's to support health, wellness, and development. And so when one is in the context of engaging with a technology that is created for agreeableness to make you feel like your answers are smart and good, which is not a bad thing. But when you're in a mental health setting, oftentimes what you need is for your thoughts or behaviors to be challenged so that you can see things in a different way or have developed more expanded perspective and not continue to roll along in the ways in which you've been thinking. So in some ways, and I think clearly that we've had some concerns about um, the role of artificial intelligence within the context of psychology, because we are not going to be able to replace psychologists with machines. And at the same time, there are some uses for this technology that can be very influential and I would say helpful for us to expand some aspects of what we can do with our work. And at the same time, needing to figure out how to integrate those more seamlessly and in ways that are ethically can be ethically done in order to make sure that potential clients and folks who are, perhaps not as aware of what the limits and opportunities are of that technology are for their mental health and their wellness as they interface with them.
Yeah, of course. And so I guess like how do you see AI being or like other technologies being integrated in like psychology in like 5 to 10 years?
I think we're already seeing it now, and I really do not know the future. So I have to, there are limits to what I can do. But I think what we're seeing now, I think, are the ways that AI can help with note taking, for example, the ways that AI can serve as prompts or can provide ways for clinicians to access information through this exchange of dialogue between the chat bot with say pre-prepared questions or questions that are emergent that help the individual describe and talk about some of the issues or the concerns that they're raising. And so that might be an initial way for a clinician who is skilled and has the training to gather some information preliminarily that then saves on some person-to-person time and allows for them to be further along in their treatment of an individual. We currently in our country have a shortage of mental health practitioners and folks who are trained as psychologists. And so even to cut wait time by allowing technologies to do things that, for example, like gather information can be helpful. I would say within the next 5 years to a decade that it likely will be possible to train AI, but it's also true that AI continues to be subject to and vulnerable to hallucinations or where it makes up things. It puts it's kind of like what we do as human beings. We have a thought here and there's another thing over here. We're not quite sure how they're related. And sometimes if we don't get a full explanation, we'll make something up to make it fit. And AI does the same thing. That's actually a way that it actually mimics human behavior until you can actually learn and research and study and have better information that can inform your work. So I think that as time moves on, we'll be able to do better and more training, but I do not think that it will ever be a responsible thing for our field to carte blanche release the technology to the mental health of individuals, that we will always have to safeguard and give it some guidance.
Yeah, of course. I feel like healthcare and mental health care especially is a field that I think will not be replaced by AI in the future, especially because as you said before, like just healthcare privacy concerns and also what you were talking about before with like how AI can just like link two things together that have no relatedness together. And so I think that's
Mm-hmm.
really insightful that you brought that up in today's interview. And
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to kind of transition to
Mm-hmm.
because we were talking about changes in like AI right now and in the future. So I wanted to kind of pivot to changes in the clinical psychology field in general.
Okay.
So, with more awareness around mental health and less stigma around mental health disorders, how do you see the field of clinical psychology evolving? Or like what have been some changes that you've seen during your time
Mhm.
as a psychologist?
I've seen this sort of like accordion effect. So when I was in graduate school in the early 2000s, years ago now, but when I was in graduate school, I we talked a lot about mental health stigma. Folks did not want to acknowledge that they went to therapy. We did not use psychologically based language. Um, it was very much a um, it was very much shunned, and people felt embarrassed and shamed. Um, Speaking of like multiculturalism, also across cultural groups, even more so. That, I trained in the South and in Georgia. And so oftentimes folks would say things, one of the barriers were, how some of the clients I was working with during my internship and practicum would talk about how therapy was seen in relation to their religious beliefs and what, that they would receive religious or they would receive therapeutic or mental health support through their religious beliefs. And sometimes that was helpful. Prayer is very powerful, but also sometimes they needed more, sometimes medication, sometimes talking about some of the issues that were happening in community and in their family, sometimes even in their church communities. So I fast forward that to today where social media, TikTok, there are so many mental health influencers. Some of my colleagues are in that space, really sharing information, helping people to understand various symptomology, why they feel the ways they do. Particularly during COVID, I saw this like real explosion of individuals talking through and talking about how we can understand the mental health responses and reactions even to a pandemic. And so this is really powerful. So I think we've now gone very far that many folks, some without the training, are influencers around mental health. And it's sort of a little bit like the same kind of challenge that we have with AI, in that the information is there, but outside of providing very basic information, any exchange becomes the practice of the field of psychology. And we want to be really careful that we understand the delicacy with which we want to engage this work. But psychologists talk about mental health 411, which is basically general information around mental health. We want everybody to know. Our science and our work is something that is important to share with many and multiple people. And the more people who have access to it, the better for our society. And at the same time, having information that is useful and responsibly shared so that folks understand the limits of what they understand, of what they know, and what they can do with that, and also what's not going to be possible to do with that is important as well.
Yeah, of course. As someone who, I guess, is doing mental health advocacy work but doesn't have any like
Hmm.
formal training, I feel like I agree with a lot of what you said. I feel like as me, I recognize my own limits and that like I don't have any, I haven't gone to like med school or grad school, that I feel like
Hmm.
it's really important for me to keep in mind, to
Hmm.
like stay up to date with the most current literature and also like not try and like I guess like act like do something that I'm not trained to do. And so I
Hmm.
think what you said is really important. And
Yeah.
just a quick last question before wrapping up our
Okay.
interview. I wanted to ask you, we were talking about the mental health crisis, and I wanted to ask you, like, what are some necessary changes that need to happen to combat the mental health crisis?
Mm. Wow. I really think that we have been so excited about our technology. It's been really exciting to watch it grow and to expand. Um, and we have to, I think, be mindful of the impact of such dependence on technology to the detriment of our ability to develop and cultivate relationships with human beings in our real lives. So IRL is really, really important on so many levels. AI can't hug you back. It just can't, and it can be fun, it can be engaging and exciting. Your TikTok feeds or your Instagram posts and scrolls, it's entertaining, it's engagement, but it is not meant to be the place where we spend so much time to the detriment of cultivating and forming relationships in real life. Our former attorney general talked a lot about the loneliness epidemic. And I think that when we think about our mental health challenges in this country and across the globe, part of it is our over reliance and dependence away from relationship with others, and that there's a cost to that. We're social beings, we just are. And so we really have to lean into that. I would say another element of our mental health crises is the shortage of mental health providers. So I can't wait for you to go to school and graduate and become a provider, either as a psychologist or a psychiatrist, whatever you choose. We need you. We need your perspective, and we need your youth and your ability to be in the workforce for a period of time and provide that care. Um, that's what I would say in terms of what comes top of mind as you pose the question, and with regard to mental health crises and what we're grappling with right now.
Of course, thank you so much for your insights, and I too cannot wait to go and become like a psychologist or psychiatrist because I feel like mental health is so important, and just like watching the people around me struggle, I think has
Hmm.
really influenced on how I want to like make an impact on this world. So I
Hmm.
just want to thank you so much again, Dr.
Oh,
Williams, for coming on and speaking with us.
you're
And
so
I guess like,
welcome.
is there any social media or websites that people can find you on?
Oh, yeah. So I am on Instagram at drwendywilliams.com, at DrWendiWilliams. And then my website is drwendywilliams.com. So everything that I just spelled out.com. But yeah, folks can find me there.
Okay, thank you so much. And that will be linked in the description for anyone that
Perfect.
wants to see. And yeah, I just want to thank you so much again for your time. And I can't wait to see what the APA achieves under your leadership next year.
Oh, thank you so much, Tiffany. You be well.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye bye.